My dear students, for today's class, it will be a short speech about a not very well-known country in the world. Everybody thinks knowing a lot about it, but in fact it's not the truth. We know this country for samba, for football, for a lot of things, but not really for economics and not really for geopolitics. I want, of course, to talk about Brazil. Why Brazil? Because it is a 210 million inhabitant country, 7th biggest GDP in the world, nearly like France. And also because it elected a far-right populist president during the last elections. This election was highly commented here and worldwide, but only by examining social politics and not economics. Of course, by our Westerner point of view, this election seems to be not a good news for democracy. But by adopting an economic point of view, it is actually just the contrary. If stock markets and currencies are anything to go, Brazil's economy would at first glance seem like one of the best bets for investors at the moment. While global markets have been experiencing sharp drops since September, Brazil's stock market and currency have both soared 13% in the same period. Market analysts say this is just the beginning of the Bullsonaro wave, the bullish trend of Brazilian stocks spurred by the election of far-right presidential candidate Jair Bolsonaro. On 1st of January, Mr. Bolsonaro will be sworn in as president of South America's largest economy. But will he be able to sustain that feeling in the business community? First part of this little speech is called Defeating the Left. To say that opinions on Jair Bolsonaro are divided is a bit of an understatement. His views on women, race, religion, gun control and LGBT rights have caused outrage during the campaign. But amongst market players, the 63-year-old former army captain is far less controversial. The vast majority of members of the business and financial community wanted to see him defeat Fernando Haddad, his rival from the left-wing Workers' Party at the ballot. The Workers' Party governed Brazil for 13 years and was in power during an era of great prosperity. But there is a broad consensus among the business community that the party was almost single-handedly responsible for the country's worst recession in history. The harshest criticism is directed against former President Dilma Rousseff and her spendthrift policies, which turned Brazil's fiscal surplus into an enormous deficit that is now harming growth and job creation. Business leaders historically sided with the pro-market center-right party, PSDB, which performed poorly this year. As Jair Bolsonaro began to emerge to be the only one to be able to defeat the Workers' Party candidate, businesses enthusiastically embraced his campaign. Now that Mr. Bolsonaro has been elected, the markets are really optimistic, but maybe there are a few shortcomings. To lead the economy, Mr. Bolsonaro, who has said himself that he does not understand much about economics, has chosen Paulo Guedes. He is a successful banker with a long history in financial markets. Mr. Guedes has promised a host of pro-market reforms, formal independence of the central bank, privatizations, reduction in tax exemptions to industries, tax simplification, and pension reform. But it will take arduous work to reform Brazil's economy. In fact, what do you know about Brazil's economy? I don't know a lot of things. Just by reading about this, Brazil remains one of the most closed economies in the world. Yeah. And many of the industries that supported Mr. Bolsonaro's rise to power are likely to resist reforms that remove government subsidies, increase international competition, or promote tax increases. Mr. Bolsonaro and Mr. Guedes also promise a new comprehensive reform of the pension system, a system which contributes greatly to Brazil's fiscal problem. Brazil's Congress has in the past resisted. it's, uh, it's a small word to say this. Any deep change to pension rules, like in France, you will say to me. Even in periods when the current president, Michel Temer, was able to waive the promise of patronage and other favors in front of members of Congress in exchange for their votes. Mr. Bullsonaro is likely to face a difficult struggle to achieve his reforms. Not only has he yet to come up with a new pension plan, he will then have to push it through a Congress in which he lacks a majority, because he won the presidential election, but he doesn't have a real majority at the Congress. And he has promised to do so by bringing in a new approach to bargaining with lawmakers that looks like a big change regarding what was done before. To make matters worse, even before his victory in Sunday's election, there was infighting within his camp, what I call friendly fire. During the campaign, various of his allies suggested Mr. Bullsonaro would adopt policies such as bringing in new taxes or putting a stop to end of your wage bonuses, etc. Shortly after the election, Paulo Guedes spoke to the press about his plans to privatize companies and to bring down Brazil's budget from its current $37 billion deficit to zero in 2019 through spending cuts. Again, there were no specific. Brazil's economy is in deep economic trouble. Its GDP shrank by almost 8% in the recent period. And recovery is still very modest. More than 12 million people are out of work and informality is growing in the labor market. It will take a lot of hard work for the Bullsonaro wave in the financial markets to produce any results in the real economy. Okay, we have understood all that stuff, but at the end, is it really important for France? What are the links between France, the EU, and Brazil? It's up to you to say, but what do you think of this victory? What do you think of this pro-market, far-right president? Is it finally a good thing or a bad thing? From an economic point of view, of course. It's up to you. Bye-bye.